The Luka Doncic-Anthony Davis trade was one of the worst trades in the history of sports. We already knew that, but somehow it just got even worse. Now, on the one hand, Anthony Davis was awesome in his Mavs debut. We got to see this identity for Dallas that they wanted to move towards. They didn't want Luka on the team anymore. They wanted this defensive identity. Nico Harrison wanted Anthony Davis. He's still a top 10 player in the league. He was fantastic last season, and all that stuff makes sense. AD showed everybody exactly what you're going to get out of him in his debut. He was awesome on the glass. Defensively, he was scoring everywhere, hitting threes, playmaking. There's an expanded offensive role, potentially for AD as he gets later on in his career, that kind of changes the way we think about him as a player. And then, to cap it off, of course, unfortunately he gets hurt. But that's part of the Anthony Davis experience, and that's one of the things that people talked about with the Luka trade. The Mavs had all these concerns about Luka's conditioning, his long-term health, his defense, all these different things, and they traded for a guy in Anthony Davis, who, yes, was really healthy last year and was awesome last year, but always seems to have some kind of issue, whether it's because he rushed back from an injury too soon or it was just a complete fluke and coincidence. It was immediately apparent for Dallas, and now their season is slipping away from them. The point of the Luka trade, or one of the points of the Luka trade, for Dallas was that they wanted to try and compete for a title this year, next year, and the year after. They knew in their heart of hearts, even if they wanted to say something else publicly about his conditioning, about how his body is going to wear down, whatever the case may be, they knew that long-term Luka Doncic was a better asset than Anthony Davis. But they thought that in the short term, this year, next year, the year after, they would have a better chance to win an NBA title. Not just make the finals, not just have a decent postseason run, but actually win the title with Anthony Davis on the roster. And that assumes that you're going to have a good run towards the end of the season, make the playoffs, and have a playoff run. But now they've lost a couple of games. They're dangerously close to not even being in the playoffs or the play-in, and Anthony Davis is out for an indefinite period of time. This was the concern for the Anthony Davis trade in the first place. Did people go a little bit too far talking about Anthony Davis? Probably. He's still an awesome top 10 player in the league, still a fantastic asset moving forward. That's why he got traded for Luka in the first place. But there's a difference between trading for 30-year-old Anthony Davis and trading for 25-year-old Luka. And despite conditioning concerns or whatever the case may be, we have already seen what Luka is in Dallas. Truly, I feel bad for Mavs fans for a variety of reasons, but in this game, they got a little bit of hope. They got to see exactly why Dallas kind of convinced themselves to make this move in the first place. You could make the argument as you're watching Anthony Davis just destroy the Rockets that they are better this season with Anthony Davis on the roster than they would have been with Luka. Luka wasn't having that great of a start to the year, then he got hurt. You bring in Anthony Davis to this group that has this defensive identity, Kyrie as a scorer, Klay Thompson as a spacer, PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford. You've got all the size. You can play AD at the 4 because that's where he wants to play. And for 3 quarters, you saw it. Oh, this is the vision. I get it. Like, yeah, I still really want Luka on the team, but I understand now what it looks like to have Anthony Davis, how impactful he can be. And then that just gets taken away from you. But it isn't just that the trade was bad, that they traded an icon, or that Anthony Davis is now hurt. It's also becoming an organizational embarrassment for the Dallas Mavericks. You've got fans getting kicked out of games in an overtime loss to Sacramento because they said, "Fire Nico" on the Jumbotron. You've got a team that is afraid to put fans on the Jumbotron because they know how upset the fan base is. Nico Harrison massively underestimated the negative impact that trading away Luka Doncic was going to have on the fans. And they've spent the last couple of days, the last week or so since the Luka trade, trying to justify it, trying to calm the fans down, showing them why they made the move, including the owner of the franchise, giving an example of players in the past who have shown great work ethic and real commitment to being fit, being well-conditioned, and taking their job seriously. And he says, okay, Kobe, that makes sense. Michael Jordan, Larry Bird. But then, Shaquille O'Neal was listed in this comment. And that tells me everything I need to know about the decision-making in Dallas, about how much this guy actually watches the NBA, about how much he realizes what he even did. I don't think the owner of the Mavs even realized what he was doing when he agreed to trade away Luka Doncic. Because Shaq is not the epitome of conditioning. He's a guy that, throughout the history of the league, everybody knows could have had a better career if he had taken his body and conditioning more seriously. And one of the historical parallels for the Luka trade, it's not exactly one-to-one, but when the Lakers traded away Shaq to the Heat because they were tired of dealing with his conditioning, because Kobe specifically was tired of dealing with him, Shaq immediately went to Miami and won a title. That's one of the historical comparisons for the Luka trade. Yet this owner is using Shaq as an example of the opposite of Luka. But it's not just that. We've also gotten more details about how exactly the trade went down, how Nico Harrison and Rob Pelinka came to the decision, and agreed on a deal that sent Luka to LA without getting maximum compensation in return. Essentially, Rob Pelinka convinced Nico Harrison that Luka was not actually as valuable to the Lakers as we all know he is. One of Harrison's requirements in negotiating was that he didn't want anybody else to know. He didn't want any of the other teams around the league to know. He wanted it to be just Pelinka and the team owners. And in doing so, the Lakers weren't even given the opportunity to speak to Luka before the trade. Ask him if he wanted to play with LeBron, if he'd be interested in signing an extension before 2026 free agency. The Mavs didn't allow the Lakers to do any of that. So Pelinka goes back and says, well, if we don't even get to talk to Luka, we're not going to give you everything. We're not giving you Austin Reeves. We're not giving you a future first-round pick. We're not giving you a pick swap. You get AD, Max Christie, and a first. That's it. And Harrison actually agreed to that. That tells me everything I need to know about the decision-making process in Dallas. It was more important to them to keep the deal secret than to actually get the best return for Luka. And now, in seeing the reaction from fans and the league, maybe that secrecy was necessary. But it still makes no sense why they wouldn't shop Luka around and get maximum value, other than the fact that Anthony Davis was just his guy. Harrison wanted AD. That's the player he wanted in exchange for Luka. And in 2.5 quarters, AD was fantastic. But this has always been the issue with AD. Nobody questioned whether he was a top 15 player. They questioned his health and longevity. Luka is 25, 100 out of 100 times. He's a better injury bet than AD. And now, Luka is thriving in LA, learning from LeBron, while the Mavs are on the verge of missing the playoffs. 2 to 3 years from now, AD might not even be on the team. And when they could have had a 28-year-old Luka, they'll have nothing. And worst of all, the organization chose this.